Are you okay? Eat, please, eat.
My daughter, you don't know what you have done.
The night Eutropia gave away her last moonfruit, she had not eaten in 3 days. 3 full days. She had wrapped herself in a torn wool cloak so thin you could see the frost on her skin through it. Her shoes had holes the size of copper coins, and in her cracked, trembling hands, she held the only thing standing between her and starvation, a single moonfruit, glowing faintly silver blue, warm like a heartbeat against her palm. She had traded her mother's last ring for it, walked 4 miles through a blizzard for it, and now, as she crouched beside the dying embers of the outer village fire, she was about to eat it. That is when she saw her. A woman, ancient, hollowed, collapsed against the roots of the great ashen willow tree at the edge of the thorn-felled forest. Her lips were cracked white. Her breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps. Her fingers, curled against the frozen mud, were blue. Eutropia stopped. She looked down at the moonfruit. She looked at the woman. She looked down again, and then, without a single word, she crossed the snow, crouched beside the stranger, and pressed the warm, glowing fruit gently into those cold, trembling hands. "Eat," she whispered. "Please, eat." The old woman's eyes opened, and what Eutropia saw inside them, even starving, even exhausted, even half-frozen, made every hair on her body rise. Those eyes were not the eyes of a helpless old woman. They were ancient, silver, and burning with something that had no name in any human language. "Child," the woman breathed, her voice threading through the cold like smoke. "Do you know what you have just done?" Eutropia blinked. "I gave you my dinner." The woman let out a sound, half laugh, half sob, that shook the snow from the ashen willow's branches. "No, child." Her fingers closed tight around the moonfruit. "You gave a queen her life." Wait. Before Eutropia even processes what she just heard. Before she can run, before she can breathe, hoofbeats, dozens of them. And a voice like thunder cuts through the frozen dark. "Find her! Find my mother!" That voice? That is Darius Rullianus, the Alpha King, and he is riding straight toward Eutropia. If you want to find out what happens when the most feared ruler in the Moonshard Realm looks down from his warhorse and locks eyes with the starving girl who just saved his mother's life, subscribe. Hit the bell. Because this story is about to go places you are absolutely not prepared for. Her name was Eutropia Voss, daughter of a disgraced gamma wolf and a seamstress mother who died of a fever 3 winters ago. In the pack hierarchy of Thornfeld Village, the lowest of all settlements bordering the great Moonshard Realm, Eutropia was what they called unranked. No wolf rank meant no protection. No protection meant no food rations from the communal stores. No rations meant she spent every season scraping together survival from scraps, odd jobs, and the rare kindness of strangers. She was 22 years old, half-starved, and had not once, stopped being kind, even when the world gave her every reason to stop. That kindness was about to change her entire world. Because the old woman against the ashen willow tree, the ancient, silver-eyed woman Eutropia had fed her last moonfruit, was Felicitas Rullianus, Queen Mother of the Moonshard Realm, grandmother to its moon-blessed warriors, living ancestor of the most powerful werewolf-fae bloodline on the continent, and Felicitas never forgot a debt. The horses arrived before Eutropia could stand up from the snow. 12 of them, black as a moonless night, each one draped in silver-threaded war armor that caught the starlight like broken mirrors. Their riders were enormous, Fey-wolf hybrids, all jaw and muscle and cold, flat authority, and they formed a ring around the ashen willow so fast that Eutropia did not even have time to be afraid before she was already surrounded. She was afraid afterward, extremely afraid. At their center rode a man so still and so controlled he almost looked carved. Darius Rullianus was not what the stories said. The stories said he was vicious, cold, a king more beast than man. The stories did not mention that he sat a warhorse like he had been born on one, or that his face, hard as it was, had the kind of bone structure that made you forget, for one dizzy second, that he was looking at you like you were either a threat or an insect. He had not yet decided which. He looked at his mother first. His entire body went rigid with something that, for just a moment, looked like grief. Mother. His voice was low. The wind died when he spoke. Felicitas smiled. She had already eaten half the moonfruit. The blue had left her fingers, the rattle had left her breathing. She lifted one hand and touched his jaw, and the Alpha King, the most feared ruler in 4 kingdoms, leaned into that touch like a child. Then his eyes cut to Eutropia. She was still crouching in the snow. She had mud on her cloak. There was a hole in her left boot. Her dark hair was plastered to her face and her hands were shaking, not from fear, she would tell herself later, but from the cold. Definitely from the cold. His gaze moved over her once, slowly, like an inventory. Whatever he found, his expression did not change. She fed me, Felicitas said quietly, before anyone could speak. The last of what she had. She did not know who I was. A pause. She knew I was hungry. Something passed across Darius's face too quickly to name. He looked at Utopia again. What is your name? Eutropia. She stood up from the snow because she refused to be looked down at while crouching. Eutropia Voss, and before anyone asks, no, I did not do it for a reward. One of the riders made a sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff. Darius did not react at all. You will come to Moonshard Court, he said, not a question. Not an invitation. Eutropia blinked. I will what? You will come. He turned his horse. Tonight. That's not... She looked around at the ring of enormous armored warriors. I don't even have a bag packed. You will not need one, said Darius, and rode away. That was the night Eutropia Voss left Thornfeld forever. She did not cry. She was too hungry. And somewhere in the trees, watching her go, 3 village elders exchanged glances. The unranked girl, one of them whispered, gone to Moonshard Court. She'll be back in a week, said another. Neither of them slept well that night, because Felicitas Rullianus had been watching them too. And before she was helped onto a horse, she had looked at the 3 elders with those ancient silver eyes and said very softly, no, she will not. Nothing in Eutropia's entire life had prepared her for Moonshard Court. She had imagined a large castle, maybe some impressive gates, perhaps servants in matching uniforms. What she got was a mountain that had been hollowed out and filled with moonlight. The court of Moonshard rose from the Thornfeld range like a cathedral grown from the earth itself, black obsidian towers spiraling upward with no visible logic, every surface etched with fey script that glowed silver blue in the dark. The gates were not metal, they were frozen waterfall, a permanent arch of ice that somehow never melted, never dripped, and sang in a low harmonic when you passed beneath it. When Eutropia stepped through, the ice song hit a note she felt in her sternum. That means the court recognizes you, said the young attendant walking beside her, a slender fey woman named Vesna, with moth wing markings on her temples and the patient expression of someone accustomed to wide-eyed newcomers. It recognizes me as what? Eutropia asked. Vesna smiled carefully. As someone who should be here. This did not comfort Eutropia at all. The bath they drew for her was the size of her entire former home. The water was warm and faintly luminescent and smelled of moonflower and pine bark. The gown they laid out was the deep blue silver of a winter sky just before dawn. Real silk, fey-woven, with tiny embroidered moonshard crystals at the hem that made soft chiming sounds when she moved. She stood in front of the copper mirror for a long time. The girl looking back at her was still hungry, still had shadows under her eyes, still had the hands of someone who had hauled water and mended leather and scraped frost off windowsills for years. But she was wearing a gown that cost more than Thornfeld Village earned in a decade. She ate. Gods, she ate. They brought her a table that groaned with things she had never seen: roasted moonhair with blackberry glaze, warm honey bread, a soup that tasted like starlight and cream, and 3 kinds of dessert she could not name but consumed without shame. Vesna watched with a carefully neutral expression as Eutropia demolished everything on the table and quietly asked if there was more. There was more. She felt, for one impossible hour, like a person who mattered. Then, the morning came, and with the morning came the court. The nobles of Moonshard were everything Eutropia was not. Tall, polished, centuries of bloodline pride compressed into beautiful, cutting faces. They did not insult her openly. That was not the way. Instead, they looked. Long, slow assessments. Eyes that measured her like an item of uncertain provenance. Whispers that stopped just as she came within earshot. She heard one clearly. "What rank is she? None? None at all? He brought an unranked here?" She squared her shoulders and walked through it. She was very good at walking through things. What she was not prepared for was the first time she saw Darius Rullianus in daylight. He was crossing the court's main hall, vast, moon-vaulted, with floors of black glass and silver pillars, flanked by 4 advisors who were visibly struggling to keep pace. He wore no crown in the day. Just black and silver working clothes, a long coat with the Rullianus crest at the collar, and an expression that suggested the universe owed him an apology and had not yet delivered. He saw her the instant she entered the hall. She knew because his step faltered, barely, almost invisibly, for exactly 1 breath. Then his face went deliberately, carefully blank. He walked past her without a word. Eutropia stood in the middle of the hall in her silk gown that sang when she moved and thought, well, at least that's clear. What she could not see, because she was not looking, was that he glanced back once, from the far end of the corridor, just once. Then he turned a corner and was gone. Within a week, Eutropia understood 2 things about Darius Rullianus. First, he was everywhere. The court was large, ancient, and labyrinth, and somehow she could not enter a room, cross a corridor, or take a wrong turn in the library without finding him already there. She began to suspect the palace itself was conspiring against her. Second, every time they were in the same room, he said something that made her want to throw something heavy at his extremely well-structured face. It started small. She had been invited by Felicitas, who was now installed in the warmest wing of the palace and treated like the living treasure she apparently was, to observe the morning court sessions. Eutropia sat quietly in the gallery and tried to understand the intricate web of Moonshard politics. She asked one question, one reasonable, genuine question about a territorial boundary dispute, and Darius, without looking up from his documents, said, "The gallery is for observation, not commentary from the uninformed." The room went quiet. Eutropia smiled. It was the kind of smile she had perfected in Thornfeld, the one that said, "I will remember this," while the face performed perfect calm. "My apologies," she said. "I didn't realize asking a question required a rank." He did look up then. A slow, measuring look. "Everything here requires a rank," he said. Then he went back to his documents. She left the gallery before anyone could see her hands shaking, with rage, not sadness. She wanted that clearly understood, even if only by herself. But here is what she did not see. After she left, Darius sat for exactly 37 seconds without reading the document in his hands. One of his advisors, Sorvanus, a hawk-faced man who had served the Rullianus line for 40 years, noticed. He said nothing. That was not the end of it. At the autumn banquet 3 nights later, a high-born noble named Lord Caelwyn arrived from the neighboring Ashvin court, arrogant, loud, and immediately fascinated by the mysterious unranked girl living in Moonshard Palace. He found Eutropia in the banquet hall and spent 20 minutes being very charming and very obvious about it. She laughed at something he said, genuinely the surprised kind of laugh that crinkled her nose, and Darius, across the hall, set his wineglass down with slightly more force than necessary. Servinus noticed that too. He still said nothing. What pushed it too far was the incident with Lady Thessaly. Thessaly was the daughter of a border lord, beautiful in an ice queen way, sharp as cut glass, and apparently under the impression that Eutropia's presence in the court was a personal insult. She waited until dinner, until the room was full, and then, in a voice loud enough to carry, "I heard the Alpha King's charity case eats with the nobles now. Has she learned which fork is for the first course, or shall we demonstrate again?" Laughter. Not all of it, maybe half. But enough. Eutropia went very still. She picked up the correct fork, precisely, without looking at anyone, and continued eating. What happened next was so quiet that half the room missed it. Darius, at the head of the table, did not look up from his plate, but his voice carried perfectly, without effort, without volume. "Lady Thessaly, you will remove yourself from my table." The laughter died. Thessaly went white. "My lord, I was only— now!" She left, quickly. No one laughed after that. Eutropia sat very still and did not look at Darius. Her fork was absolutely steady. Her face was absolutely composed. Later, alone in her room, she sat on the windowsill and looked out at the moonlit peaks and tried to work out what it meant, that a man who openly dismissed her in the gallery had just quietly, completely, and without fanfare, destroyed someone who humiliated her at dinner. She could not work it out. She went to bed confused, which was somehow worse than going to bed angry. The Moonshard Realm observed 12 sacred ceremonies in a year. The most significant was the Velahari, the moon drawing, held at the first full moon after the autumn equinox. Every resident of the court participated, even guests. Even, as Vesna explained with slightly too much apology in her voice, unranked ones. The Velahari required a paired ceremony. Each participant was assigned a partner for the night's ritual, a symbolic acknowledgement of the mate bond tradition that ran through Moonshard bloodlines. Partners stood together for the moonrise, completed the bonding walk through the court's obsidian maze, and were bound briefly, wrist to wrist, with silver cord during the final blessing. The assignment of partners was supposed to be random. Eutropia's partner was Darius. She stared at the assignment list for a long time. Vesna stood at a careful distance. "The list is never actually random," Vesna said after a diplomatic pause. "Felicitas," Eutropia said flatly. "I couldn't possibly say." Felicitas, from the warmth of her wing of the palace, was absolutely having the best time of her several centuries-long life. The Velahari preparations required 3 days. Dancing instruction, the formal moon step that partners performed at the ceremony's opening, was mandatory. Which meant 3 days of Darius Rullianus standing approximately 12 inches away from Eutropia in a high-ceilinged practice hall, not looking at her and being technically, infuriatingly, perfectly correct in every instruction he gave. Your posture collapses on the turn. Your grip is too light. You'll lose the step. Step through, not onto. You could just say left foot, Eutropia told him on day 2. "Left foot implies you know which one that is," he said. "I am not yet confident." She stamped on his foot. Not hard, diplomatically, but intentionally. A muscle in his jaw twitched. She smiled. Something shifted after that, barely, like a door opening a crack in a windstorm. He was still cold, still controlled, still composed to the point of abstraction. But there were moments in the practice when he said something that was, under clinical examination, a joke, delivered entirely without expression. If she had not been paying such close attention, she would have missed them. She was paying very close attention. The night of the Velahari arrived cold and brilliant, the full moon so large above the obsidian peaks that it looked close enough to touch. The court gathered in the moon hall, and Eutropia stood beside Darius in her ceremony gown. Deep silver this time, with fey crystal thread that caught the moonlight and scattered it, and felt for the first time that she genuinely belonged somewhere. It was a dangerous feeling. She noted it and kept it contained. The dance was fine. It was more than fine. His hand on her back was careful and exact, and he guided the steps without making her feel guided, which she suspected required more effort than he let on. She would not think about how warm his hand was. She was not thinking about it. The obsidian maze walk was quiet. They moved through it in the silver dark wrist cord loose between them, neither speaking. Somewhere in the middle of the maze, where the obsidian walls narrowed and the moonlight cut down in a single white blade between them, he stopped walking. She stopped too. He was looking at the moon, or pretending to look at the moon. She could tell the difference by now. She had been studying his tells for weeks against her better judgment. "Why did you do it?" he said. She did not need to ask what he meant. "She was cold and hungry," Eutropia said. "The same as me." A pause. "You didn't know who she was." "I knew she was a person." A beat. "That's usually enough." He said nothing. But in the narrow moonlit passage of the obsidian maze, she was close enough to see something move through his expression. Something older and more complicated than cold authority. Then he started walking again, and the moment was gone. She told herself it meant nothing. She was lying, and she knew it. 3 days after the Velahari, Lord Kelwyn of Ashvin Court made a formal request to the Alpha King for Eutropia's company at the Ashvin Winter Hunt. Darius denied it, without explanation, without consultation. Eutropia did not find out until Kelwyn told her himself, confused, slightly flushed, in the corridor outside the library. She walked directly to Darius's study. "You denied a social invitation on my behalf," she said, without asking me. He did not look up from his work. "I did." "On what authority?" "Mine," he said, "as you are a guest under my protection." "I don't recall asking for your protection." "Regardless," he said, "you have it." She stood there for a long, charged moment. "I don't know if I should thank you or be furious," she said. He looked up then, that slow, measuring look. "You could try both," he said. "I find ambivalence suits you." She left. In the corridor, she pressed her back against the cold stone wall and breathed. The problem, the enormous, inconvenient, completely unreasonable problem, was that she was starting to like him. Not despite everything, because of everything. Because of the fork and the gallery and the dance and the midnight maze, she needed to stop. She did not stop. It happened on the night of accord, the formal winter gathering where all noble houses of the Moonshard Realm convened to renew their allegiances. Eutropia had not been told that Lady Maris was coming. Maris Valdorn, daughter of the Valdorn house, oldest noble line in the realm, and, as Eutropia gathered very quickly from the reactions of everyone around her, the woman the court had assumed for years would one day be Alpha Queen. She arrived like weather. All white fur and gold hair and the absolute certainty of someone who had never once been told she did not belong. She crossed the great hall, and every eye in the room tracked her, and she knew it, and she moved through it like a gift to the universe. She sat beside Darius at the high table. He let her. Eutropia sat 3 seats away and watched him speak to her, quietly, privately, heads almost together, and felt something she recognized with great displeasure as jealousy arrange itself in her chest like uninvited furniture. She had no right to it. She knew that. She stood up and moved toward the courtyard, needing air. That was when she heard it. Not from Maris. From Lord Kelwyn, arriving late, wine-flushed, speaking to a companion at normal volume in the corridor just outside the courtyard door. The whole thing was Felicitas's scheme, apparently, brought the unranked girl in as some sentimental gesture. Darius has been humoring it. The old queen gets what she wants. A pause. Poor thing actually thinks she's welcome here. He's said as much to Sorvinus. She'll be placed in a border village once the winter season ends. Quietly, kindly, gone. Eutropia stood on the other side of the stone doorway and did not move. Placed in a border village. Once the winter season ends. Quietly, kindly. Gone. She had known, of course, in the back of her mind, that she was here on borrowed time. She was not noble. She was not ranked. She had no magic, no bloodline, no political value. She had given an old woman her dinner and been swept into a world that was never going to keep her. She had known, but knowing and hearing it said aloud in those words, in that casual, dismissive tone, she walked back to the great hall. She smiled when she needed to smile. She gave nothing away. Later that night, she returned to her room, the beautiful moonlit room with the silk-curtained window and the view of the obsidian peaks, and sat on the edge of the bed. She did not cry. She thought very carefully about what she was going to do next. And then she started, quietly and methodically, to pack. What she did not know, what she could not see because she was not in the room, was that Darius had watched her return to the hall, had watched her face for the rest of the night, had known, from 17 feet away, the exact moment something changed in her eyes. He said nothing. He let her pack. What he could not have told anyone, because he had not yet found words for it, was that letting her pack was the hardest thing he had done in a decade. Utopia was gone before the first winter bell rang. She left no letter, no dramatic scene. She folded the silk gowns and left them on the chair. They were not hers, had never been hers, dressed in the clothes she had arrived in, and slipped through the servant gate while the court slept. She walked south. Through the thorn-felled forest, past the ashen willow, past the frozen track where the horses had ringed her that first night. She had a vague plan. The village of Morvenwick was 3 days south. It was large enough to disappear into, small enough to have no connection to Moonshard Court. She was 1 hour into the trees when the cold hit her. Genuinely hit her, the deep winter cold of the thorn-felled range, no silk gown to blunt it. She pulled the wool cloak tight and kept walking. She did not look back. She was a good hour into the forest when she felt the first sharp pain behind her sternum. She stopped, hand pressed to her chest. A strange heat, then a strange cold. She had never felt anything like it. It was gone in seconds, and she told herself it was nothing. She kept walking. Back at Moonshard Court, Darius woke at the first winter bell with a sensation in his chest, like a hook being driven through him. He sat upright. His breath came wrong. He pressed his hand to his sternum exactly as Eutropia had, unconsciously, instinctively. Sorvinus found him in the corridor 90 seconds later, already moving. "She's gone," Darius said. Not a question. "The gate guard reports. How long?" 1 hour. He stopped moving, stood very still. "My lord," Sorvinus said carefully, "the mate bond. I know what it is. It activated during the Velahari. You knew then." A long, terrible silence. "Yes," Darius said, "and you said nothing." "No, because of your father." The pause was longer this time. "Because of my father," he said quietly. "Because his father, King Aurelian Rullianus, old and brilliant and a master at long games, had been engineering a political match between his son and House Valdorn for 11 years. Maris, the alliance, the territory, the bloodline merger, and Darius had let him, had said nothing about the bond, had let Eutropia overhear Kelwin's words, which had not been accidental. Darius now understood with freezing clarity. Kelwin answered Valdorn. Kelwin had been placed. He had let it happen. He had let her walk out into the winter. "Get me a horse," he said. "My lord," said Servinus, "the bond, get me a horse." He rode alone, no guard, no formation, just Darius Rullianus in a black riding coat, pushing a horse through a frozen forest by moonlight. 2 hours in, the chest pain became unbearable. This was not a metaphor. This was not poetic suffering. Mate bond severance, when a bond had activated and then been abruptly severed by distance and emotional rupture, caused a physical deterioration that werewolf fae physiology had no resistance to. No magic, no title, no sheer force of king's authority could hold it off. He rode through the pain. And in a tiny wayfarer's shelter 3 hours south of the palace, Eutropia woke to the sound of hooves slowing outside and knew before the door opened who was on the other side. She did not move from the cot. He had to duck to get through the doorway. He was pale. She could see it even in the dim lantern light, and breathing like a man who had been underwater. He stopped just inside the door and looked at her, and whatever control he normally kept over his face was simply not present. It had been left somewhere on a frozen road. "You're hurt," she said. "Yes." "The bond?" He did not ask how she knew. "Yes." She stared at him. "Why are you hurt and I'm not?" "Because you left." A pause. "And I let you." Another pause. "I should not have let you." She sat up. The lantern light was very small and the shelter was very cold and they were very close. "Kaelwyn's words," she said. "Border village, end of winter." "Planted," he said, "by my father's people. Through Kaelwyn, through Valdorn." His jaw tightened. "I knew about the Valdorn match. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself you would be..." He stopped. "I told myself many things that were not true." "What is true?" she said quietly. A long, long silence. Outside, the horse breathed in the cold. "You are my mate, Eutropia." The lantern flickered. "The bond activated at the Velahari," he said. "In the maze. I knew." A beat. "I have known since before that, if I am honest. I am not accustomed to being honest about this." "About what, specifically?" "About needing someone," he said, like the words cost him a structural piece of himself. "About finding someone necessary. I am not..." He pressed his hand to his chest again and breathed through something. "I am asking you not to leave. I am asking incorrectly and too late and in a wayfarer's shelter in the middle of a frozen forest, and I am aware that is not ideal." Eutropia looked at the Alpha King of the Moonshard Realm, standing half-broken in a doorway that was too small for him, saying the truest thing he had ever said to the most wrong person from the most wrong village, and felt the furnace of the thing she had been containing for weeks crack open. "Come inside," she said. "You're letting the cold in." He stepped forward. She moved over on the cot. They did not speak again for a long time. Outside, the moon was enormous. They returned to the court 3 days later. Eutropia wore one of Darius's riding coats over her old cloak. It was approximately 3 sizes too large and very warm. She wore it without comment. He did not make one. The court noticed everything. The court noticed the coat. The court noticed the way he walked, a half step closer to her than protocol required. The court noticed with collective political alarm that the Alpha King looked at the unranked girl from Thornfeld the way the Moonshard Realm looked at the moon, like something essential, like something you could not afford to lose. Maris Valdorn noticed too. She sent 3 urgent messages to Lord Valdorn before breakfast. Felicitas, sitting in her warm wing with a cup of moonbloom tea, received the news with a smile so ancient and satisfied it could have been carved into the palace walls. "It's about time," she said, to no one in particular. But the peace lasted 5 days. On the 5th day, Eutropia woke up feeling wrong. Not sick, not exactly. Something in her blood, something deep and cellular and moonlit, was behaving in a way she did not have language for. Vesna fetched the court's healer, an elderly fae named Brindal, who had attended to the Rullianus bloodline for generations. Brindal examined her, looked at the ceiling for a while, and then looked back at Eutropia with the expression of someone recalibrating a fundamental assumption. The bond, Brindal said carefully, has completed. What does that mean? It means, Brindal chose her words, you carry the air of Moonshard. The silence that followed was very thorough. That, said Eutropia slowly, is an enormous amount of information. There is more, said Brindal. The child... A pause. In the old records. The prophecy of the double moon. She went to the shelf. She found a volume the color of midnight and opened it with hands that were not quite steady. A child born of the bond between a moon-blessed alpha and one who is unranked but ungifted, the veiled one, would carry both the wolf and the fae in perfect balance. No one has been born this way in recorded history. It was considered a legend. Eutropia stared at the page. It's not a legend, Brindal said quietly. No, Eutropia said. I gathered that. Darius was told within the hour. He came to her directly, not running, but walking very fast, which for him amounted to the same thing. He stood in the doorway of her chamber. She was sitting at the window looking at the peaks. Brindal told you, she said. Yes. A pause. Are you frightened? He said. She turned to look at him. Of the baby? Of any of it. A long moment. Ask me again in an hour, she said. Right now I'm still processing. He crossed the room. He sat beside her at the window, which required folding himself to fit the windowsill at all, which would have been undignified for any other Alpha King in history, and which he did without a word. They looked at the mountains together. There is something else, he said. She waited. My father. He stopped, started again. The Valdorn marriage. The scheme with Kaelwyn. I had told myself my father was pursuing political strategy. Standard. Expected. A pause. I was wrong. About what? Specifically? My father has been trying to prevent the double moon prophecy from completing. His jaw was very tight. For 20 years. There were others, 3 before you, unranked women with Fae heritage in their bloodline, women who disappeared. He stopped. Women who disappeared. Eutropia went very still. Your father, she said, killed them. I do not yet have proof, Darius said, but I have enough to... He stopped. How long have you known this was possible? Since the Velahari, he said. Since the bond activated, I began looking backward. A pause. I was looking for proof before I acted. I was trying to protect you without revealing... Darius. He stopped. You should have told me, she said very quietly. Immediately. He looked at her. I know, he said. It was the first time she had heard him say those 2 words as though they cost him something. They found the proof in the vault of records 3 nights later. Sorvinus had known for years, had buried it, carefully, loyally, out of fear and decades of service to a king he had watched slowly become something dark. He brought the documents to Darius without being asked, the night after Eutropia was told about the 3 women. Sorvinus had wept, bringing them. Quietly, sitting outside the study door. He did not tell anyone, but Eutropia had been in the corridor, and she had seen, and she had sat beside him on the cold stone floor without a word for approximately 10 minutes before she said, It wasn't your fault. It was, Sorvinus said. I knew, and I stayed silent. You're not staying silent now, she said. He looked at her, this unranked girl in the oversized riding coat, and understood what Darius had seen. The documents detailed everything, the orders, the payments, the staged accidents. 3 women in 20 years, each carrying Fae heritage bloodlines, each erased before a bond could form. Aurelian Rullianus had been dismantling the double moon prophecy piece by piece, every time it tried to assemble itself. Because the prophecy said more than what Brindal had read aloud. The full text, the passage Brindal had not yet reached, said, The child of the double moon would break the false king's hold on the moon-blessed throne. The blood of the veiled one burns cleaner than the crowned. Aurelian was not the rightful Alpha King. He had taken the throne 40 years ago through a ritual that had been partially falsified, a mate bond blessing performed with a woman he had coerced, not chosen. The blessing had never truly been sealed. It had been a fracture at the foundation of his entire reign. And if the double moon child was born, every wolf in the realm would feel the difference, would feel in their bones that the old king's bond was wrong and the new one was clean. Darius held the documents for a long time. Eutropia beside him watched his face. "He's my father," Darius said. "He killed 3 women," she said gently. A long pause. "Yes," he said. "They went to Felicitas first. Of course they went to Felicitas first. She was the only person in the realm whose authority sat above Aurelian's, because she had been the queen before him, the true queen, the moon-blessed one. And she had stepped back from the throne, not been removed. She read the documents. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "I suspected. I couldn't prove." She looked at her son's face and then at Eutropia, and then at the space between them that was not empty. "I found the right person eventually." "You're not surprised," Darius said. "I have been waiting for 30 years for someone to bring me those papers," Felicitas said. "I knew if I found the right girl." Her eyes went to Eutropia. "The right girl who was unafraid of cold and hunger and didn't need the world's permission to be kind?" She paused. "I am very old. I know what I am looking for." Eutropia stared at her. "The ashen willow," she said slowly. "You were not lost that night." Felicitas smiled. "Oh, I was cold," she said. "I was genuinely cold. A woman my age in a blizzard is a woman in genuine difficulty." A pause. "But I had been waiting there for 3 hours, and 5 girls walked past me before you stopped." A long silence. "You chose me," Eutropia said. "Your kindness chose you," Felicitas said. "I simply noticed." The confrontation with Aurelian Rullianus happened at the Grand Accord of the Winter Court, the largest formal gathering of the year, attended by every noble house in the realm, every allied court, every significant bloodline. Darius and Eutropia did not announce it. They simply walked in together, and Eutropia, in a gown of white and moon silver, with the Rullianus bonding cord at her wrist, and the quiet, contained certainty of a woman who had survived Thornfeld winters and court politics, and still had not stopped being kind, stood beside the Alpha King in front of every power in the Moonshard Realm. And Aurelian Rullianus looked at her, and knew. He knew from the cord, he knew from the way Darius stood, not formal, not political, but solid. The way a man stands when the thing he is standing next to is the realest thing in his world. He knew from the way the court's moon-blessed wolves went very still, the ancient instinct activating, the blood recognition beginning, something deep and true and bone-level rippling through the room. He tried to stand. He tried to speak. Felicitas stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She had the voice of someone who had been old when the palace was young, and when it filled a room, even kings went quiet. "My son," she said, looking at Aurelian, "the records are complete. The witnesses are prepared. The bond has been recognized by blood and by the moon." A pause. "Step down." The silence was absolute. He stepped down. Not because he had no other options. Aurelian Rullianus had been playing chess with kingdoms for 40 years and always had other options. He stepped down because he looked at his son's face and understood, with the clarity available only to very old men facing very final moments, that Darius would burn every other option to ash before he let harm come to the woman beside him. He had not raised a son capable of compromise in this. He had tried. He had failed. He stepped down. The exile was arranged quietly, carefully, with the ruthless administrative efficiency of Sorvanus at his most competent. Maris Valdorn withdrew her house's claim and departed within the week. Not happily, but without incident. Lord Kelwyn sent a letter of formal apology that was extremely long and extremely transparent, and Eutropia read it and felt briefly, deeply sorry for him as a person, and then filed it appropriately. Darius began the process of the true Alpha blessing. The moon witnessed renewal of the bonding ritual, this time clean, this time real. The moon-blessed wolves of the realm gathering on the obsidian peak at the full moon to witness an alpha bond that had never been performed correctly in 40 years. On the night of the ceremony, Eutropia stood at the peak of the obsidian mountain with moonlight pouring over her like water, and thought about the frozen village of Thornfeld, about her mother's ring, about 3 days without food, about the weight of a single moonfruit in her cracked, cold hands. She thought about what it cost to be kind when you had nothing left, about the fact that the universe had apparently been watching and had extremely strong opinions about it. Darius stood beside her, not in court robes, not in armor, just himself, in the moonlight, looking at her with an expression he had stopped trying to manage. "Ready?" he said. "I've been ready since the Ashen Willow," she said. The wolf song rose from the mountain. Below them, the Moonshard Realm stretched out in the winter dark, all obsidian towers and silver light and ancient waiting power. And somewhere at the center of it, a kingdom that had been ruled by a lie for 40 years felt for the first time the specific gravity of a bond that was completely, irreversibly, bone-deep true. The moon was enormous. The child, still months away, still secret kept, still a prophecy becoming a person, was already changing things. And Eutropia Voss, unranked and magnificent, pressed her palm to the moonstone altar and sealed herself to a kingdom that had been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly her. And there you have it, Eutropia from starving in the snow to sealing a kingdom. But wait. Aurelian is in exile. Not dead. The Valdorn house withdrew. But Maris doesn't forgive. And that child, the double moon heir, hasn't been born yet. Which means the prophecy is only half complete. If you want to be there when the heir of Moonshard enters the world, when Maris comes back with a plan no one saw coming, and when Eutropia has to fight for her crown the way she once fought for her dinner, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with Eutropia and Darius, because of their story, it is nowhere near done.